Marriages are usually a very important stage in the lives of people. At that point, you decide to spend the rest of your life with your partner regardless of your differences, or, as it is usually said, for better or for worse. Sometimes, this union turns out to be the best of decisions and brings an absolute derivation of joy. Today's story is about a lady who had to stick to her husband for several years despite things not being all rosy. Also, if you've not done so already, please subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell to get inspired by these real-life stories every day. Now back to the story. Deborah and Douglas are two very different individuals. From their likes and hobbies, it is almost easy to imagine how they'd live as a couple. Deborah was more of an inside person who took solace in reading and could almost not do without reading a book in her day. However, the same cannot be said of Douglas, who was more into the enjoyment aspect of things. He would prefer to spend time with his friends at a bar while they chat over several bottles of alcohol. Despite their somewhat distinct personalities, this did not stop both of them from getting married, as they were very much in love with each other. After their marriage, things were going on pretty smooth. Douglas was working at a factory and was receiving a very good salary, which was able to take care of him and his wife adequately, while there would even still be enough to have some enjoyment to himself. Deborah, on the other hand, worked at a library and didn't even earn as close to what her husband was earning, but this still didn't let her stop from working hard. A couple of months passed after their marriage, and then things would start to look in the opposite direction after what had already been a very enjoyable few months into their marriage. The factory where Douglas worked was shut down, and as a result, he lost his job, leaving Deborah as the only one who was working and bringing money home, even if it wasn't exactly as huge as it used to be with Douglas's income. During this time though, Deborah got pregnant and eventually gave birth to a girl who the couple named Mandy. Bringing a child into life is always something of a joy for parents, and of course, it was for Deborah and Douglas. But at the same time, Deborah couldn't stop thinking about how they would have to cope with expenses and having to adequately raise a child in their current financial situation. She turned to her husband many times to look for a job, to at least help sort some bills, as her salary was no longer cutting it. Douglas did get a couple of jobs, but he never did last in any of them, as they were either not a good fit for him, in his opinion, or he didn't like the work. This left Deborah with no other options than taking up several jobs to help her family's struggling financial situation, while her husband spent most of his time at home watching TV and also spending some even more time with his friends at clubs. Deborah understood that the situation was not normal, but continued to hope that things would work out perfectly. Quite fortunately, she was able to get multiple jobs, and at a point in time, she was even working 3 extra part-time jobs, one of which included as a cleaner, and with this, she was able to at least get enough money from those sources as well as her job at the library. These things can usually get very frustrating after a while, and it did begin to show in the family. Deborah was the one buying the groceries and literally putting food on the table by working several jobs while also taking care of the child. And on the other hand, her lazy husband had even stopped job hunting as he felt there were no jobs for him. Once, Deborah tried to get him to start a business as a car driver, but he totally went against it. Most nights, Deborah would cry as she thought of her situation. She was working tirelessly to help her family, and her husband wasn't even doing anything. Deborah had always been more of an introverted person, and even though she could have sought advice from people and even get help from people who could find her husband a job, she decided to keep it all to herself, as she believed it was only a sacrifice she had to make for her family, while still remaining hopeful that things were going to change later on. Unfortunately, things didn't change, and throughout Mandy's early school, Deborah was the one paying her school fees and providing everything for her child so she wouldn't lack anything. At the same time, she was also providing for her husband, who still remained lazy and preferred to watch TV all day, and when he's not doing so, he's out with friends. Deborah continued to work multiple jobs and even continued to look at any little job she could do that could even bring in small money for her. She was hardworking and stopped at nothing to get Mandy the best possible education while also giving her the best as a parent. A few years later, and Mandy was ready to get married. And even though this is usually something that could be regarded as some good news, Deborah didn't seem very happy with it. She looked at the situation as a sort of a pattern, as Mandy's husband-to-be was also without a job and did not look like he was ready to search for jobs to at least help take care of his family. To Deborah, he was more like Douglas, and she didn't like that. However, she allowed the wedding to go through, despite fearing her worst, and it didn't take long for her expected outcome to flash right before her eyes. Mandy's husband could barely take care of Mandy, and Deborah had to intervene by sending money to them on many occasions, with Mandy also still in school and without a job. As if that was not enough for poor Deborah to bear with, Mandy would soon get pregnant and give birth, and with that, more burden would be placed on Deborah, who was now catering for her own family and her daughter's family too. Even as she got older, she continued to work several jobs. When she was 40, she was looking older than most of her friends. She barely had time for herself, or to even get a makeover to even treat herself to something nice. While most of her friends were looking much younger and doing things they loved, poor Deborah was always on the lookout for any possible jobs she could take on. This routine of working for her husband and daughter's family continued to go on for several years until one day when Deborah went to the supermarket to get groceries. After picking out what she needed, she stood in line, and after waiting for almost 20 minutes to get attended to, two teenage girls came in and tried to get checked out before Deborah. Of course, this is something that no one would like, and rightly so. Deborah spoke against what the girls were trying to do. In response, the girls laughed and said that pensioners like Deborah didn't have anything to do in retirement, so Deborah could afford spending the whole day there. These words hit Deborah in a way she never imagined. At the time, she was only 45, and a bunch of teenage girls were calling her a pensioner. After leaving the supermarket, Deborah headed home, and the only thing on her mind till she got home were the words used by the girl to describe her. On getting home, she went straight to her room and looked into a mirror, and there, she realized she was not looking her best self. She sat down crying and reminiscing of how she was the best looking girl in her class when she was younger and how boys were all over her and fighting to carry her backpack. Now, she looked way older, and even she knew the girls were not lying. She did look like an old pensioner. She didn't have good enough clothes or shoes, and even her hair and skin weren't in the best condition. And suddenly, she realized she needed a change. She decided that she was going to work towards changing, that she was going to work for herself, that she was going to live her best life from then on and spend her money on herself. With all this all planned in her head, she slept well that night. Deborah woke up the next morning as a new person. She already had all she wanted to do pictured in her head. And the first step to being a new version of herself was calling Mandy. Over the call, she expressed her love for Mandy but told her she was no longer going to be the sole breadwinner of her family and advised Mandy to get a job. She also told her to get her husband to look for a job and even gave her further advice on her marriage by telling her she could file for a divorce if she wasn't happy with her marriage and if things weren't working out. With that said, she ended the call and wore the best of what she had in her closet and headed to a beauty salon to get a makeover. After 5 hours, Deborah walked out of the salon looking like an entirely new person, and even she couldn't believe she could look that way. She now had a stylish haircut and colored hair with also beautiful manicure on her hands. Next, she headed to the shop for clothes. At the store, she got new clothes, shoes, and a couple of other beautiful dresses. It was even at the store that she threw away the clothes she wore from home and left the store looking like someone else entirely. She was now looking really good, and she was happy for herself. When she got home, her husband was in the usual couch watching TV, and when he saw her, he couldn't believe his eyes. Even though he clearly saw a huge change, he couldn't help but ask why she spent so much money on the makeover. But Deborah was not going to have any of that. Just then, the doorbell rang, and it was Mandy, who came to check on her mom to see how she was doing, especially after the conversation they had earlier in the morning. Just like with Douglas, when Mandy saw her mother, she was shocked. Her mother was not even recognizable. Mandy then couldn't help but compliment her mother, and together they went to Deborah's room. There, Deborah told Mandy about how happy she was with the makeover and how she was going to even do more things just to make herself happy. She also talked about getting an interesting job that would give her moral satisfaction. Mandy was happy for her, and soon after, Deborah escorted her as she left. On getting back in, she was ready for Douglas, and it just had to be now. Deborah told Douglas she was going to file for divorce, and that she was tired of taking care of him for 20 years while she didn't look her best self. Right there, Douglas was shocked and he immediately came to the realization that Deborah was actually going to leave him. He wondered how he was going to survive without her, since she was the one literally doing everything. As he continued to ponder on what Deborah had just told him, she walked up to her room, where she looked at herself in the mirror and smiled at how she was looking. From that moment, she was going to start living her best life. What a story! Unfortunately, there are several women in the world today that are in marriages like Deborah, where she is the only one providing for her family while her lazy husband just did nothing. According to a research study in the Journal of Marriage and Family, different women were talked about not only being the breadwinners in the family, but also having to change their behavior to not have to look like they were insulting their unemployed husbands. In one of the stories, a lady named Emily has a husband who is seeming like Douglas. He lost his job and was not ready to job hunt again, as he watched her provide for the family. Instead, he spent time with his computer, which Emily perceived as indolence and found it emasculating. Quote, "He's not strong like a man who just says, quote, 'Oh, I don't care. I've been fired. Screw them. I'll go find another job.' He's very sensitive and emotional. And he's like a girl. Like, man up. Be stronger. Have a harder shell. Let it roll off. Have confidence," unquote, Emily said. While a case like Emily can be discouraging, another lady, Tamara, believes her husband, who lost a $150,000 job, still tries his best as he goes for interviews and strives to get a job, even though in the meantime, she has to cater for the family. Quote, "If you're going to be married and you're a woman, you just better be prepared to be the one that is the linchpin, because, fair or not, most women that I know, that's the way it is. So I sort of knew that things were going to fall apart if I didn't hold them together," unquote, Tamara said. If you enjoyed the video, kindly give it a thumbs up, leave a comment in the comment section, and share with others. Thanks for watching, and catch you in the next one.